really starting to get anxious about LVO. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another Glacial Geek Deep Thoughts Think Codes with me, Phil the Glacial Geek. Coming to you here from Savannah Land Games. Taking you here from Savannah in the Phil Lair here, where I will be... the modeling I'm going to be doing is actually working on rebasing these dude bros. I've got some Las Cannon bros that I've got on bases. This guy is going to be an interesting one because he's a metal one, and I've got a nickel underneath his base there to keep him on, so we'll see. I don't think it'll be hard to get off, but I'm wondering if I can manage to save this so I can glue it underneath his new fancy 32 mil base to keep him upright. And I'm also possibly going to be working on, depending upon the time, basing my flyer stand, since we'll get to that in a second, actually. So today's topic of discussion while I am working on these is going to be what can you learn from a tournament experience. So when you go to a tournament, you're not always going to be the first place at that tournament. You're not always going to win every single one of your games, but you're also not necessarily going to lose every single one of your games. So what can you do? What can you learn from these experiences? What can you take away from these experiences? And how can you improve your playing ability, the list that you're taking, and just your general experience at a tournament from these experiences? So, it's not always just going to be like, well, I lost, therefore the list is garbage and I'm garbage, I'm just going to give up. If that's what you take away from it, you're selling yourself way too short. You should also not go into a tournament and be like, well, I won, therefore I'm the best, there's no proving, I'm just going to sit back and wait for the next tournament and then just go in and do the same, because that's also you can't, that's not going to help you, you know what I mean? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about what you can learn from these experiences and what you can teach yourself, and some of the things that a lot of it's going to be a lot of telling you what I've learned and how I learned it in order for you to kind of get an idea of what you can take away from these kind of situations. So, so why don't we just start getting to work here? So, like I said, this last weekend I went to Siege of Augusta. So I'm going to start off with a bit of a tournament recap, I guess. This last weekend I went to Siege of Augusta, where I went 4-2, which is actually the best I've done in a 2-day tournament. I actually won a game on day 2, which was kind of exciting. And doing so, I was able to beat a lot of different lists. I lost, like I said, I lost 2 of the games. I ended up coming in 5th at the tournament because of it. And the lists that, and essentially I was using this as a build up to LVO. You know, if it did really well, I was just going to go with that list. I wasn't going to tweak it anyhow, but it would give me an idea of what I needed to work on for other lists that I wanted to work on. How else I wanted to work on the list to make it better for LVO, because I knew that the competition I was going to face this weekend was going to be tough, but I also knew that there was going to be 400 something more players come into LVO that I would be facing, and that I would need a list that would have to be like even better than that, and I would need to be even better than that. So let's go over kind of the game. We'll gotta go round by round. I'm just going to give you an idea of what I faced. So turn 1, I faced honestly one of the lists that I was most fearing with any of my lists, honestly, is I faced an Orc Horde. So I faced a list with 178 bodies in it. It was brutal. 178 bodies. He ended up having like a 40-man blob. Because he combined a 30-man blob with a 10-man blob with their new stratagem that he jumped right into my face. He had a bunch of commandos that were coming in from all sides. He had a bunch of mech guns that were shooting down some, stronger shooting at me. He had a Chinork that dropped in 9 inches away with a whole bunch of his special characters and some knobs. It was a brutal list. And it was one of the lists that I was kind of most fearing having to face at any of the tournaments with my list, because my lists are pretty they're pretty elite. They've got some bodies, but they don't have anywhere near 178 bodies. So I knew that my list was really good at shooting big, heavy things, big, nasty things, tanks, Magni, Mortarians, and I knew that I could handle those kind of things in any situation, but I didn't know if I had enough DACA in order to handle that kind of list, that kind of horde list. I knew that I had some DACA and I had some things in place in order to handle DACA, but I didn't, or handle hordes, but I didn't know if it was enough. So I ended up winning the game. We ended up having to call at the end of turn 2 because we ran out of time. But it was a close game. I had more objectives. I managed to do better against it because he put him towards the back and then was jumping and infiltrating a whole bunch of guys. So I worked on placement and bubbling, and I put my scouts along the front. Oh, actually, here's the list that I brought with me to that list. So it was Azrael, Primaris Lieutenant with a power sword that I gave the Heavenfall Blade. I had 3 5-man Bolter Scout squads. I had 2 5-man Reaver squads with grav shoots. I had a Primaris Ancient. I had a Dark Shroud with a heavy bolter. I had 2 Razorbacks with twin assault cannons and storm bolters. I had 2 Mortis Pattern Dreadnoughts with 2 twin las cannons each. And I had 2 8-man Hellblaster squads. So what I did was I had 2 main bubbles of interest. So I had my Dreadnoughts on one side with the Dark Shroud to protect them from shooting, because I figured his mech guns would try to take them out since they were the biggest threat to the mech guns. And then I had my Hellblasters with Azrael and everyone else over on the other side, forming a nice big blob, taking up a big footprint. I had the twin assault cannon guys kind of in the middle, because I knew that the way I had it situated, he would kind of have to come down the middle and disperse. So I had them in the middle. And then I had my scouts along the front, just outside my deployment zone, to push him even further out from where he could drop in. Which worked. That's exactly what happened. It managed to. There was like one little place where he could bring in like a squad of commandos off on the side, but I used Auspex Scan to take off one of the units, and then the other units that kind of came in later, I managed to handle pretty well with Overwatch. And handle with the bolter squads that were shooting at him. I also managed to leave it so that there was only, like I said, there was one avenue of him to be able to drop people in the middle, and that made him have to spread out to go to handle the two different forces of influence that I had on there. And it also meant that he wasn't able to really focus and just drive up the middle, drive forward at me, which is what his force would have done better. So by working on my placement, which I've been working on a lot lately, and I feel like I'm getting much better at making sure that I'm securing my deployment zones from being dropped in on. By doing so, I feel like I've managed to give myself a tactical the ability to handle that kind of thing, since I can narrow down the field in which these hordes can come at me. And in doing so, it means that whatever DACA I do have has a longer time and an easier time shooting at them, since they can only come at me so many at a time, down the middle. So it's sort of like in like 300 where they meet them at that one pass, because it doesn't matter how many millions of guys you have, they can only funnel through so much at a time. So that's kind of that's what I had with the Orcs. Like I said, it was a victory. I was very happy with that victory, because, like I said, that was the list that kind of list was a list that I've been fearing for a long time here. I was really worried about kind of what it would consist of and how I would handle it, and how I would be able to play up against it and see if it would just overrun me or not. And it turns out that there was a lot of bodies, and he was doing a lot of overrunning, but it wasn't. I was able to hang on, and like I said, pull off the victory. So that was pretty cool. I was happy with that. Then round 2, I faced a Tau force, which I haven't faced Tau in a long time. But he had a brutal list. It consisted of 10 deep striking commanders. 10 deep striking commanders with their drone squads. And then the rest was filled up with units of drones and fire warriors and those marker light Dubros that like kind of look like they're looking through like a little like VR headset thing that they're looking at. So he had a bunch of those, and a couple of those. But that's what he had his list. So what he did was he basically had enough drones and fire warrior squads to allow him to deep strike all of his commanders. So he then proceeded to deep strike them in, and it was a tough list because my list is very good at getting an alpha strike. It's very good at that initial punch because of all of the las cannons and everything that I have. If I can get that first initial punch, it does well to kind of knock out an army. So, but if he's dropping in on me like that, I don't have that same kind of ability to respond that he had. So he did start dropping in. I had first turn. So first turn, I started wiping out a bunch of the drone units because I knew that he could use those drones to take off wounds from the commanders. So knowing his army, just from looking up and studying them, I knew that that was going to be important. That I needed to keep those blade of wounds away from the things that were really going to hurt me. So I started focusing down the drone units so that they weren't going to be around too much longer into the next turn. I managed to get my first round kill because that was one of the things. We were doing the Eternal War ITC missions. So these weren't the Champions missions. These were the ones based upon the Eternal War missions from the main book. So I was drawing like kill a unit, so I had to kill at least one drone unit in order to get it. So I was focusing them down, getting those kills in, and then next couple turns he starts bringing in his suits and commanders, just dropping in, and he had a mix of fusion blasters and pulse rifle. What are the pulse cannon? I don't know, the ones that look like Gatling guns on their arms, whatever it is. Couple of those, and he starts like wailing away. And again, I kind of had myself set up on two different groups. He manages to, but I put the Dark Shroud with the Hell Blasters this time because I was afraid of them getting shot up. So he drops in, and he ends up like wiping out my las cannon bros. He ends up wiping out my Razorbacks on the one flank, and then he starts coming towards me and my Hell Blasters on this side, and my Hell Blasters start marching out towards him in the middle. I think we were playing no, this wasn't the relic. No, we were just playing off. There were some objectives in the middle that we had to go to, but yeah, so we're chasing off each other, and my army was able to fight him off. I had target priority, so I had a lot of the things that weren't my Hell Blasters shooting at the drone units that he dropped in with. And once those were wiped, then I just focused all my Hell Blasters on whatever commanders were in range and whatever commanders were not in range of any remaining drones that were on the table. So by doing so, it meant that they couldn't just pass off the wounds, which meant that if I got a wound with my Hell Blasters, they were going to be doing some major work onto his commanders there. So so it worked. I ended up killing. We were playing No Mercy, so I ended up killing I think all of the commanders and most of his other units, honestly, on there. And they were able to just to beat him back and kill him, which was cool. So that was another army that I thought I was worried about, was a lot of deep strikers that I can't target and I can't deploy against properly. But again, I managed to deploy my units in a way that left him very little room to drop in places that I couldn't handle. And in so doing, I was able to respond when he did drop in, because of the fact that when you place well and you manage to put your units in ways that don't leave him options, you know where they're coming in, because he's not going to want to come in the far corner where he can't do anything. He's going to want to come in the front where he can try to attack you, even if it's not ideal. And that's what I did. I just left him with fewer options so that I could, I knew I was in positions where I could respond when he did come in. And I did so, which was great. So I managed to pull off the win there. It was, again, all of these games were a ton of fun. I had a blast up there in Augusta, at the Siege of Augusta, and it was a great time. It was just really a great time. So, really shout out to Brenton for putting on a good tournament. I had a blast. It was a fun 2 days. It was a tiring 2 days. The first day was 4 games. The next one was 2 days. And it was long days, but it was a lot of fun. So that was the second game. The third game, I went up against... who did I go up against in the third game? Oh man, what did I do? Oh, third game was against Death Guard. So it was Mortarion. It was two. There were two plague burst crawlers. There was a bunch of poxwalkers. Typhus was there. A bunch of the special characters. He had a bunch of plague. He had a bunch of what are they called? Plague marines that he had in rhinos. And I mean, it was pretty brutal. It was a brutal list. First round, I think I got first, and I wasn't able to kill off much. I think I may have gotten a kill, but if so, it was like a minor one, and it wasn't. I was not feeling good. So I knew I was hurting really bad. He was making 5-up saves for days, and it was pretty brutal. But I knew that what I needed to do was make sure that I kept my las cannons off to the side, and I put my hellblasters kind of in the middle, so that he would have to come up at me in order to get me. But I also had out in objective territories, I had my scouts that acted almost as a screen, not so much for deep striking as much as like road bumps for him to come through, to come across. So he had his poxwalkers went up, and they ended up having to charge into my scout squad that left. That meant they were stuck there kind of in the middle, and I could shoot at them and eventually whittle them down. I eventually killed off Mortarion and killed a bunch of things, and I just kept whittling away at him. You know, his plague burst crawlers were doing some major damage to me early on, so I deep struck my reavers behind his lines, because his whole thing was to march forward. That's what the Death Guard do really well. So what I did was, once he had kind of moved out, I dropped my reavers behind him, charged one set of reavers into his two plague burst crawlers, and plopped the other ones on top of an objective back there. And I just took I just held up those plague burst crawlers. I think over the course of like 3 or 4 turns worth of combat with them, I ended up doing I think it was 4 turns of combat with them. I did like 3 wounds onto 1 plague burst crawler with those reavers, but the entire time he couldn't shoot with them. You know, they were stuck in combat with these reavers, which meant that I wasn't getting shot with the plague burst crawlers, which quite frankly is a perfect use for the reavers for me. Is that if they could keep me safe from those plague burst crawlers, that's a trade-off I will make any day of the week. So we had that. So yeah, so then I ended up pulling out the victory there. You know, from there I realized that what you need to do is you need to identify the biggest threats and make sure that you have that you concentrate on making sure that they're handled. So first off, you know, Mortarion, you need to handle him. If you don't handle him, you're in trouble. You're in some serious trouble. So I knew that I needed to make sure that I could handle Mortarion, and that I focused on Mortarion. So I shot most of my stuff into Mortarion that first couple rounds before I took him down. I think I took him down turn 2, maybe. I think it was turn 2 that I ended up taking Mortarion down. You know, he doesn't last long because he's you know, a big target that I can target the entire way across the board. He's not hiding, not safe behind anyone there. So in doing so, I knew that he was the biggest threat to just completely wiping my army. So now I knew that I just had to make sure that I could go keep going forward and find ways to take out the rest of his army. So what I did was I kind of positioned myself back in my deployment zone so that he had further to come across the table. And I just started firing, and I just started shooting. I used my lieutenant eventually to just tie up a squad of... He ended up killing, I think, all of my Hellblasters. I ended up tying up a squad of his Plague Marines with my lieutenant and banner bearer in combat, so that he couldn't jump onto other objectives. I had my Reavers tying up his Plague Burst crawlers so they couldn't shoot at me. And then my las cannon bros lasted the whole game, and they just kept firing and killing things. And then once I whittled away enough there, his special characters were the closest ones to my las cannon bros, and they just, double shot at them in the face. And eventually took out most of his army and then held the objectives and won with it. So I identified each of the important targets that were going to be the most danger to me and made sure that they were a priority. So I saw the Plague Burst Crawlers. I tried shooting at them with the las cannons, and those between between their high toughness and their disgustingly resilient, I knew that it was going to be a pain to try to kill them. And if I wasn't going to be able to kill them, I needed to do something to kind of handle them and take them out of the fight. So I knew that deep striking those Reavers in there would allow me to keep them tied up, because I knew even if he moved them to get them out of combat, he didn't have many forces back there that could go and do anything about it to kind of take care of me. So I knew on my turn I could just run up and charge him again. So it was a tough fought match. It was a lot of fun. I had a blast, and his army was beautiful. It was beautifully painted. So that's always fun to play against a beautifully painted army. And I managed to pull it out because of target priority in that case. Round 4, I faced off against a Gene Stealer cult and Astra Militarum force list that is freaking brutal. So he had 2 battalions. He had a GSC battalion, and he had an Astra Militarum battalion. The Gene Stealer cult battalion consisted of a Patriarch and 2 Primuses, two 19-man pure strain squads, and then he had 3 neophyte squads with mortars that he held all of them in reserves. So then he had his Astra Militarum force, which consisted of a company commander, a Primaris Psyker, and then he had 3 infantry squads with las cannons. He had 2 mortar teams, heavy weapons teams with mortars. He had 3 basilisks, and he had 2 vultures, which are, I think, are the ones with the Punisher cannons. Vultures? I think vultures. Anyway, he had 2 of them, and it was just so tough. We were playing Hammer and Anvil, and I held... in this case, I think I learned a lesson. I ended up losing this one. It wasn't that close, honestly. He kind of whomped me pretty hard. But I deployed really well to defend myself against the deep strike threats. But what he did was he just held those guys in reserves until turn 2 or turn 3. It did make him think a bit, and it made him have to deploy in ways that he wasn't super happy with. But at the same time, I was left with, because of the way I deployed my Hellblasters really far back because I was afraid of the other things coming forward. And what I should have done is I should have deployed them up front more so that I could just charge my way forward. But I didn't, and it ended up hurting me pretty bad because my Hellblasters for like the first 2 or 3 turns didn't have anything to shoot at until his vultures came into range. And even then, it's not ideal to shoot at flyers with plasma because you're at -1 to hit, So, yeah, that was a tough match. But like I said, I learned a lot by doing it that way. I was able to face off against that list. I think that list had a lot of hard counters to me. The ability to shoot me from range. And get up close with me and tie me up. A lot of bodies on the field. So it was it's a hard counter to most every list, honestly. But at the same time, it was a tough list to face. I know that, like I said, I could definitely have some changes to the way I played it. But I also came to a realization that my list may have been a bit slow. I don't think I had enough. I don't feel like I had enough speed in my force to be able to respond to those kind of situations in order to be able to move and jump onto objectives. And I had my 2 Reaver squads, and they dropped in and failed charges and then just got blown off the table, which was tough because I wanted to drop them in and tie up his Basilisk. That was the plan. I was going to play them the way I did the Plague Burst Crawls, and if it had worked, if I had pulled off the charge, it could have made a difference. Because those Basilisks are brutal, man, brutal. So I knew that. So looking at the list, I was like, I think it's a bit slow. So I started talking because I ended up playing. It was playing against Nick, a guy from Savannah that we had gone up there with. So afterwards, we talked about how I could improve because he knew that I was using this as a test prep for LVO. So we were trying to. Now that he had beaten me, he was happy to talk to me about what I could do to improve my odds and improve the ability of my force to face against the things that I'm going to see in Las Vegas. So like I said, we fought and he won because of the way he played. And if I had pulled up forward, it may have been a different story. May not have been, honestly, the way he played it, the way that list is. And he knows his army, he knows his list, he knows the game, and he was really good. He's a really good player. So I put myself at a disadvantage, and he was able to exploit that and win. So what I need to do is I just need to work on. I knew that I needed to be more aggressive with my Hellblasters, and I needed to be. Actually, at the time, I didn't. Well, I knew I needed to be a little bit more aggressive. I still wasn't quite sure about how aggressive I needed to be with them. But yeah, so I started. I started realizing that my tactics and how I was utilizing those units wasn't really working the way I needed them to. So back to the drawing board a little bit on how I would play my army and how I would get good scrub. So that was the fourth round. That was the last round of day one. So we came into day two, and I was playing against the first game was playing against a Space Wolves army that was had a lot of DACA. So he had a bunch of Razorbacks with twin assault cannons and las cannons. He had a bunch of Grey Hunters to go jump on objectives. He had a bunch of Devastator squads. He had Logan Grimnar giving them rerolls. He had Niall causing my guys to lose getting minuses to my attacks, and he had and also giving him like a bunch of cool things. So yeah, it was a tough fought game. But what I did was I was a little bit more aggressive with my Hellblasters, and I held my las cannon guys back a bit. And I had a string of luck with this one las cannon dread that just kept getting 6-up saves to save himself from dying on one wound. That was phenomenal. And I mean, there's nothing you can do about that if you're competing against it, At that point, it's just like one of those things where it's just like, what can you do? There's nothing you could do at that point, It's just, the reality is, like, sometimes the luck of the dice just are with you, and when that happens, you roll with it. And if it's not yours that have the luck, then you just kind of have to hope for the best and hope that you can respond. I was able to pull off the victory. I ended up killing most of his army and had Reavers drop in on the relic and run away with the relic. I also had Reavers drop in behind his lines that kept him from getting a bunch of Maelstrom points because of it, because he had a bunch of wolves screening out, but I was still able to pull him in, drop him in, close enough that I was able to kind of mess with his abilities there. And then he had to focus on trying to get the relic, because if you don't get the relic, you lose. That's it. That's how you win the relic Maelstrom game. So I was able to run away with the relic. I was able to kind of get some points that I needed on the Maelstrom, and I left my opponent with fewer options than he really wanted, and ended up pulling out the victory because of that. So that was it was a blast though playing against him. I had a ton of fun, and like I said, every single one of these games I just had a ton of fun, and it was a brutal game. Well, it was a brutal series. It was a lot of fun, but a lot of work and exhausting, and just a good time. So then my last game, at this point, I was 4-1. I was feeling nervous, honestly, which is another thing I kind of learned from the tournament, was that you need to learn how to keep your nerves in check, because you start to get nervous, especially if you start doing well, because suddenly you're like, well, maybe I could do this, maybe I could win, and you start getting in your own head, you start thinking about that, as opposed to just concentrating on the game and doing what you can do. So last turn I went up against a Demons and Chaos Space Marines list that had Alpha Legion and had the Demons. Honestly, I don't think I'm going to be facing this list in LVO, because it utilized a lot of things that aren't going to happen in LVO. For one, it used the old Demon rules because the Codex dropped the day of our tournament, the first day of the tournament, and it wouldn't have given people who wanted to run Demons the ability to write lists ahead of time, so that, because the point changes, things may have changed in points, options may have changed, so it just wouldn't have given people an opportunity to make a list if they wanted to run Demons. So we ruined that. But they did rule that you could use the stratagems just so that they had, so that they had some stratagems that they could use during the game, because that makes a big difference. Honestly, that's the big difference that codexes bring to the game is the stratagems. So allowed them to have the stratagems. So the list I was facing had 4-up invul brimstones, which are no longer a thing. The changeling given a -1 to hit, which is no longer a thing. And it also had a deep striking Magnus, which is word on the street is going to get FAQ'd away that it's only going to work for, that deep strike rule is only going to work for a faction demon versus keyword demon. So it'll be interesting to see if that happens or not. That's word on the street, but from pretty good sources that on the street. It was actually Reese from Frontline Gaming said that they're not going to say anything. They're going to let the GW do it, but that GW will probably be coming out with an FAQ before ITC, before the LVO. And he said, if I were you, I would not plan on deep striking my prime arcs using that stratagem. He's a big person in playtesting these lists with these things with GW. So I think he probably has a pretty strong idea as to what is going to be coming his way with that. So I don't think that I'm going to be facing this list. It was a tough list. He played it really well. I did a good job of keeping most of the table on deep strikeable. But he also had a Fire Raptor, he had a bunch of cultists, and it just overwhelmed me, is what it came down to. Each time he would just fly up the Fire Raptor. I ended up killing Magnus, ended up killing the Fire Raptor, but not before he was able to take away a lot of my force. I used Auspex Scan on Magnus when he dropped in, which was pretty good, so I could get it before he could buff up his invul save, which is a big difference. And that's the big thing that the deep striking is that most of the time, if he can drop in, he can now make sure that he wasn't on the table before he could buff up his invul save to a 3-up. So that makes a big difference when you're dealing with Magnus, because at that point it's like 2s are the only thing that will kill him. Rolling a 2 on his invul save is the only thing he can do, because he gets to re-roll the 1s. So he dropped him in, ended up really beating down on me. Again, I think I deployed too far back with my Hellblasters for fear of Magnus deep striking, so I wanted to take up as much space as I could. But that meant that my Hellblasters really weren't in a place to really bring the fight to him, which is what I need them to be. So, he ended up winning that game pretty handily. I gave a good account of myself, but he beat me solidly through playing the game really well, knowing his army, and playing them to their strengths. He tied up all of my my scouts with units that were just difficult to get through. So either a 40-man cultist blob that he had because he combined the two, or it was with a brimstone squad that had 4-up invul saves and -1 to hit the whole time. So it just becomes difficult to handle all of that and try to gain traction when you're stuck in these endless loops of combats that just aren't to your favor. So that's kind of my experience. So I went 4-2, had a lot of fun, came in 5th, and I knew that I figured there were some things with my list that I needed them to do better. All of the units in my army did what they were supposed to do, and they did it well. And because of that, I knew I was happy with the direction that I'm taking with my list. I just knew that there had to be some tweaks that needed to be made because it wasn't fast enough. It didn't allow me to be aggressive enough with the Hellblasters. And I needed to be. I just needed to be more aggressive. I needed to be faster. I needed to be able to move around the table more to respond to a lot of different threats. I was still worried about getting overrun with hordes, and I didn't think that I quite had the DACA to handle it. Even though I was able to handle the orcs, I had trouble against the cultist spam that he threw down at me. So it just became difficult to handle all of that. I knew I needed some changes. So I came up with a new list. After talking to the guys that I went up there with, talking to some other people, I came up with a new list that uses the core of this list and just changes some things. So I took that original list, like I said, the one that I ran there, and I dropped both of the Razorbacks. I dropped the Primaris Lieutenant, and I dropped a single Hellblaster. So I had an 8-man squad and a 7-man squad. In its place, I was able to put in a Talon Master, which is the new HQ for the Dark Angels. It's basically the same model as Samuel and Sableclaw, So it's a land speeder, it's got a power sword, it's got twin assault cannons, it's got twin heavy bolters. He ignores cover and ignores cover to any Ravenwing unit within 6 inches of him. He rerolls 1s to wounds, just like a lieutenant, because he's basically a lieutenant in a land speeder. Yeah, and that's what he does. And I give him the Heavenfall Blade that I was giving the Primaris Lieutenant, and suddenly he's got 5 attacks. He's strength 6, AP -3, D3 damage, and he's on a land speeder, so he can shoot up 16 inches and advance, and he has Jink. He's also a character, so you can't shoot him unless he's the closest one. He's awesome. He's really freaking awesome. And I got him for the cost of one of the Razorbacks and the Primaris Lieutenant. Basically, just like straight up, those two drop and I get him. And he is a lieutenant, so he replaces the lieutenant well. And he has the DACA of the Razorback. It's a few less wounds, but you can't shoot him as much as you could the Razorback. So he sticks around pretty well if you play him right. Then I also was able to add in a Dark Talon, which is the flyer from the Dark Angels. It's got 2 Hurricane Bolters, and it's got a Rift Cannon. Rift Cannon is heavy D3, strength 10, 3 damage, and if you do a wound, you get to roll on a chart that changes based upon the tier that it's at. And if you succeed on that roll, you get to do D3 additional wounds, D3 mortal wounds to that to the unit that you did a wound on. So it's pretty brutal, and it's a flyer, so it moves really fast. At first turn, if I keep him back, if I deploy him within range of the Dark Shroud, suddenly now he is giving him a. If I put with the Dark Shroud, I'm now giving him a. I'm giving him a -2 to hit, so it protects him that first turn a lot. And he's just really a strong unit. I used him in a battle report that you guys have seen, where I would shoot him up behind enemy characters and just use it to snipe out characters, which is awesome. You know what I mean? He's super fast. It's a flyer, and he does a really good job of getting places on the board that I wouldn't normally be able to. I think it's a pretty strong. I think it's pretty strong. And I also dropped one of the Mortis Dreadnoughts and added in these guys. So that's why I was rebasing these guys, because I added in a Devastator squad with 4 las cannons. My thought behind that was it's 10 points cheaper to do it. It still gives me the same number of las cannon shots. It's technically 3 less wounds and less toughness, but if I'm getting shot at by strong weapons, so this squad, if it gets 2 lucky las cannon shots in it, is going to lose 2 guys. Still going to have 3 las cannons left. If you get 2 lucky las cannon shots into my Mortis Dreads, who now don't have the 4-up invul save from Azrael, it's going to be in trouble. You know what I mean? They've got the same save as the Dreadnought, but can get cover easier since they're infantry. So I can plop them inside of a piece of terrain and get that +1 to my cover save, which is great. So my thought was these guys I still have the Mortis Pattern Dreadnought because I think the Mortis Pattern Dreadnought's strong, but I dropped the other one for these guys because A, 10 points cheaper, and B, it allows me to hold my own against a lot of strong DACA. You know what I mean? So if I'm getting shot at by las cannons, these guys are going to stick around a lot longer than my Mortis Pattern Dreadnought, just because of the fact that you're wounded on 2s, yes, as opposed to 3s, but if you roll that D6, you're not taking away any more than 1 guy. I'm losing 1 wound to a D6 roll on a las cannon versus losing 6 wounds on a D6 roll of a las cannon. So I think it was a strong turn. I've used it once, and I was pretty pleased with it. I'm gonna have to try it again. Still gonna have to test it before going on. I've still got a week to go, right? plenty of time. So I'm still in the drawing board stage. I think it's going to be strong, but I think it's going to be good. I'm pretty happy about it. I think it's going to be a strong way. And like I said, that's what I learned. I basically looked back at what happened during my game, both the wins and the losses, and tried to see what I did wrong. I wasn't aggressive enough with my Hellblasters because honestly, even if they start dying, the banner there is allowing them to shoot again, and I'm getting extra shots. The fact is, if they're sitting there with Azrael, they're sitting there with the Dark Shroud, even if they're getting shot at as the target, they're not dying as fast as you would think. Primaris stick around for a long time with those 2 wounds. It takes a lot to work your way through them. The 8-man squad, you're talking about 16 wounds that you have to work through. And they're only on 2 wound models, so it's 16 wounds that even if you're shooting with las cannons, you're at most killing one guy. And if he gets killed, he has a 50-50 chance of coming back and shooting you in the face, even on your shooting phase, which is pretty brutal. I came to the realization that I need to be more aggressive with my Hellblasters. I needed the ability to have more running, more movement, a bit more mobility on the table, especially during late game. And that I needed DACA that I could place where I needed it to, because it's really easy to counter deploy your hordes away from my Razorbacks. A lot less easy to counter deploy your hordes away from my Dark Talon. So I think that given all that, I think it's on the positive end. I think my new list kind of answers a lot of the questions and problems that I had with the previous list during the tournament. The reasons I saw, the lack of mobility, allowing me to be a bit more aggressive, and the ability to, because with my Talon Master, he allows me to respond to where people are coming in to try to tie up my units in combat. Because with a 16-inch move, I could jump across to another unit that's having trouble getting tied up in combat, and he can jump in there with his 5 attacks, AP -3 sword, D3 damage, and he could start doing some hurt, putting in some hurt, and he can respond a lot faster than my 6-inch moving Primaris Lieutenant. So I think it gives me the ability to respond to the enemy. It gives me the ability to fight the enemy the way I need to fight the enemy, and it gives me the ability to really take the fight to my opponent, which I think is the strength of my list. My list is very aggressive. It's very strong. It's not defensive. I've got the ability, I've got some things that help them survive, but it's not really made for sitting in a corner doing nothing. It's made for going up and getting in your face and rapid firing you with plasma incinerators. So I learned that in this, and I need to be less afraid of dying to things. I can just run them up there. Even if I leave some space behind me that units can deep strike in, as long as I keep those Hellblasters within 12 inches of that space, I can throw down Auspex Skin and get off some shots at them before they can do anything. And if I'm shooting you with my Hellblasters before you can shoot me, you're in trouble, regardless of where you're dropping in. Even at the -1 to hit, it's still doing a great job of managing to kind of take away units that way. So I can be more aggressive. I need to be more aggressive. And in so doing, I think I'm going to be doing better at LVO than I did here. Just in-game mechanics-wise. Maybe not necessarily results or scores or whatever. I just feel like I feel like I go into it more confidently than I kind of went into this one. So that's my ideas. That's kind of how I learned. The importance of what you can take away is not just your win-loss. It's not just whether or not you were able to beat the enemy. What it matters is that you're able to look back at these games, win, lose, or draw, see what went well and see what didn't go well, and make sure that you can make changes to your list and your gameplay and your strategies that will respond to those. So like I said, my Hellblasters weren't doing enough work during a couple of my games because I wasn't aggressive with them. So I changed my tactic, become more aggressive with them. Suddenly I become better. I look at it and I go, well, I wasn't able to run around the board as much as I needed to. Having the Reavers drop in is nice, but they still are moving 6 inches once they drop. So I'm making a decision kind of where they're going to be when they drop in, even if it's behind enemy lines. I need the ability for mobility. So I respond by getting some units that are faster, that have better movement abilities, and suddenly I'm going to be doing better. I noticed that I was scared and having trouble with hordes, so add in some extra DACA. I'm probably going to be doing better, because hordes, they don't care if it's an assault cannon or if it's a hurricane bolter. They just care about the number of shots. Weight of fire is how you take down groups of guardsmen. That's how you take down orc boys. It's just weight of fire. And the Dark Talon has 2 hurricane bolters. So at close range, you're looking at 24 shots. That's brutal. That's brutal. It's just, that's kind of what you have to do. And you have to look at your games, look at what you did, and even if you won, see what happened. So against my game that I had against the Tau, I realized I still wasn't aggressive enough. And that just added into what my losses that I had because I wasn't aggressive enough that made me realize what I needed to do. Again, against the Orcs, I was able to pull out a victory, but it wasn't a comfortable victory. It was a tough, hard-fought victory. And what I needed was more DACA. I needed the ability to put DACA where it needed to be better. So that's why those changes happened in my second list. And I'm feeling good about this second list. I'm going to try to go forward with it and see what else I can do with it. But yeah, at this point, it's strong, but I think it's we'll see what happens. So that's kind of I guess this is sort of like it was like a tournament recap and a just an idea on what you need to do when you go into a tournament to appreciate it. Not just go, well, I had however many wins, however many losses, that determines how well I did. No. Look at the situation, look at the things. Like I said, the list that I lost to in Chaos, I'm not going to be facing at LVO. It's just because the rules are different now and they changed. I'm not going to be facing that list at LVO. So I can't just go, well, I'm lost if I face against Chaos. Like, no, that list isn't real. That list isn't going to happen again. And understand that and see why he was able to win so that if you start facing something similar, you can respond to it better. But don't give up on you or a list just because you have a loss. And don't just sit back on your laurels just because you won some games. You can always be improving. And that's the whole point of these games, is that you learn from them. Analyze them, and analyze them early. You know what I mean? I'm analyzing this back now, but I was doing it during the tournament. After we finished at like close to midnight on Saturday after the first day of gameplay, and we sat down and talked about our list and talked about how we can improve, because my friends knew that I'm kind of gunning up to go to LVO, so they were happy to sit down and talk with me, even though we were exhausted after an entire day of just of playing. We sat back, we analyzed the list, analyzed what was going on. They had thoughts, I had thoughts, we talked about it, and then the next day we saw some more information and then talked about it again afterwards. Talk about it while it's fresh in your head, because there are going to be things that you're going to forget. There's things that I forget all the time, and it's, I hope it's not old age. So yeah, you just kind of, be analytical. Don't just blow it off. Don't just ignore it, but make sure that you look at the things that your army did well, that you did well, and how you can improve. So I need to improve on my tactics. I need to be more aggressive. I needed a list that could respond faster. So I created a list that could respond faster because I knew what I wanted to do. And if I don't have the tools to do it, I need to get those tools to do it. It's just like anything else that you do. If you're trying to cut down a tree and all you have is a drill, it's going to take you forever to try to do that. If you go out and get yourself a saw and make sure that you have a saw in your kit, you're probably going to be better able to take it down. So know what you want to do, see what you can do, look at your strengths and look at your weaknesses and see how they do. Because that's the best test, is like on paper, it doesn't make a difference what it does on paper. All that matters is what it can do on the table. And you need to be able to respond to situations. And if you have a key linchpin that's the only way that you're going to win, how does your list respond if it dies? How is your list going to respond if suddenly a big chunk of your strong units are dead? And I tried to think about that. What's my list going to do if suddenly, what's this list going to do if first turn I lose my Border's Dread, my Dark Talon, and my Dark Shroud? I don't know. Find out, and see what happens, and then see if you can respond, and don't give up. Keep fighting the good fight with it. So I hope you guys have all enjoyed this. I certainly have. Let me know down below what you guys do post tournament, post game. When you're trying to improve what you're doing. Let me know your ideas, and let me know what you guys think about my two lists. What you think is better. What do you think is more aggressive? What do you think is going to do better in a tournament? So, again, I hope you guys have all enjoyed this. I certainly have. I have been Phil, the Glacial Geek, as always. And until next time, have fun.